A woman sells herself to a wealthy man for 3 nights in order to pay off her father's debts. Her mission will be completed when her child is born. The first time they met was in a darkened space where Charles hid behind a screen and bombarded Elisabeth with questions. Why didn't Elisabeth marry if she was in good health? Why would she do something like that? Elisabeth stated that she would sell everything she owned to make a living, but she knew he only needed her for a short time. Elisabeth was made to feel uneasy by such direct probing. However, due to financial constraints, she took the position. Elisabeth was placed in a remote hotel for the next 3 days. When she walked in, she saw a well-dressed gentleman seated inside. He was uneasy and kept drinking in between small talk. He informed Elisabeth that they had only 3 days together. After the baby is born in 10 months, whether the infant was male or female, Elisabeth would be paid a substantial sum of money, but she would only be paid if she kept it a secret and cut off all contact with the child. Elisabeth remained silent. A deal is still a deal. She had no objections, so she turned around and began to undress. Elisabeth slept on her side the first night and let Charles uncomfortably conduct the ceremony. Despite the fact that they did not communicate, Charles struck Elisabeth as a true gentleman. Charles treated her with the utmost deference. Elisabeth appeared more relaxed on the second night. She began to enjoy the intimacy's charm, but she couldn't help but cry later. It was embarrassing to sleep with a stranger. Charles noticed the shift in her mood and encouraged Elisabeth to vent her feelings. Their relationship appeared to have evolved slightly at this point. The third evening, Elisabeth gradually gained the courage to express her deepest wants. The powerful river of pleasure reached her heart. It also served as a ceremonial farewell to their 3-day journey. Elisabeth gave birth to a baby girl 10 months later. But it happened before she could see it. The baby was promptly removed. It's a long, arduous labor and delivery process. No mother can be unconcerned about her child. And in the years after that, every day, Elisabeth missed her daughter more and more. When her daughter's birthday arrived, she would jot down her desires in her sketchbook and wish her a happy birthday from afar. After 7 years, Elisabeth finally learned the news about her daughter, so she went to meet her daughter as a governess right away. The servants informed her that her daughter's name was Louisa. Louisa was a lonely and difficult youngster. Because she did not want to be disciplined, Louisa had previously expelled 3 governesses in a succession. She rarely goes out in her spare time and frequently isolates herself at the lake pavilion. When Louisa first encountered Elisabeth, she kept her normal cold demeanor. The first thing she said was, "Leave." Elisabeth was unconcerned by her daughter's arrogance. On the contrary, it increased Elisabeth's resolve to stay and care for her growing daughter. Duke Charles returned the next day. He was taken aback when he spotted Elisabeth. He requested Elisabeth to go right away, forcing him to suppress his disbelief. Elisabeth says she will never forget the sound of her daughter's laughter or what happened after she was born. Charles was furious at Elisabeth for breaching the deal, but per the governess's contract, he was still required to retain Elisabeth for a month. So, to prove his point, he informed Elisabeth what had transpired. His wife was involved in an accident and became a vegetable 10 years ago. Charles sought Elisabeth in order to preserve the marriage and the family line, but he never imagined fate would bring them back together. This is without a doubt the worst tutor. When the youngster defied her, she would take up the paint and spill it on her face. She then splashed a cup of paint over her own face as well. Elisabeth consented to Louisa's father's request in order to properly educate daughter. Elisabeth's punishment for Louisa will be how she treats herself, but she had much more to teach Louisa than what was in the books. Louisa has been withdrawn since she was a child due to a lack of maternal love. Her father, Charles, indulged her so much that she grew up to be brave. On her first day of class, she resisted learning. She also made fun of Elisabeth for being a poor, ignorant lady. When Elisabeth realized what had happened, she locked Louisa in the classroom. She would not be consoled no matter how much she cried. But Charles couldn't bear his daughter's anguish. He was so enraged that he immediately requested that the course be halted. However, Elisabeth's demeanor was forceful as well. She discovered after 2 days together that Louisa had been neglected for a long time. Louisa was unable to recognize herself. Elisabeth knew it would be beneficial to Louisa. But first, Louisa had to learn to obey her. Elisabeth made a pledge to reassure Charles. Whatever penalty Louisa suffers, she would be punished beside her. Now that she'd said it, Charles had to give in and say a few words of comfort to his daughter before leaving. And Elisabeth followed through on her promise. Louisa was defiant and refused to eat dinner. She didn't eat anything after that. Louisa cursed her to death. She heard. She, too, accepted it. She also flirtatiously instructed Louisa on how to let her die. After a couple rounds of exchanging words, she eventually wore down Louisa. She began to be drawn to the card on the table. Elisabeth embraced the chance and began teaching her some basic phrases and grammar right away. She proceeded to tell a narrative about light and fire. She claimed that fire, like magic, has the ability to stop time. People are no longer required to observe the rules once the fire has been extinguished. They are free to do whatever they choose, and when the fire rekindles, everything will be as if nothing occurred. Louisa paid close attention that day, but then she started going even further. In a moment of rage, Elisabeth revealed the horrible truth to her. She said it will all go away as Louisa grew up. Because Louisa is female, everything Louisa possessed would pass to her spouse when she married. Louisa would be devastated. As a result, Elisabeth was able to disarm her daughter with love and patience. Louisa stopped protesting lessons and began studying instead. Charles was pleased to see his daughter mature, and he and Elisabeth gradually grew a different kind of fondness for one another. Charles came to his wife's bedside at night and told her what was on his mind. For many years, he just told his unconscious wife about his heart, but this time his mind flashed with a picture of someone else. At the same time, Elisabeth harbored unacknowledged sentiments for the man who had paid for her virginity. She used to go to the lake and watch Charles swim. Through the hazy lens, she discreetly admired Charles's body. She would then subconsciously caress her neck. Her love was evidently on fire as well. That night, they convened in their study. Charles took the initiative to inform Elisabeth of what happened 7 years ago. To conceal his emotions, he wanted Elisabeth to tell him with conviction. The past has passed us by. It won't happen again. He can, however, deceive others but not his own heart. When they established eye contact once more, their inner feelings rushed to the surface. They have no moral qualms about expressing themselves on this night. The long-suppressed fire of the heart, and the perceptive Louisa observes her father's affair with Elisabeth. When the ice on the frozen lake suddenly shattered and fell into the water, the girl was walking on it. The woman saw and jumped into the cold, stinging water. She saved the girl by breaking through the ice fractures with her body. Although Elisabeth has always been a teacher by Louisa's side, her deeds could not conceal her true identity as Louisa's mother. She vowed to the sleeping Louisa that she would never abandon her. Louisa gradually began to reveal her heart to Elisabeth over time. Louisa realized the sick lady was not her own mother. She, on the other hand, went to see the ailing lady every day. Charles's father had arrived. Lord Clare was a natural hedonist who reveled in all manner of costly pleasures. Lord Clare immediately held a Christmas ball upon his return. Charles was never a fan of dancing, but when he's alone with Elisabeth, he can't stop himself from wrapping his arm around her waist and spinning around the room. Their connection progressed swiftly after that. Charles even wanted to take her and her daughter with him at times. But Charles, as a married man and the family heir, he had a lot of weight on his shoulders. He would not allow himself to entertain such irrational notions. Soon after, an unwanted group of guests arrives at the estate. Charles's company is in peril. To pay off the loan, he had to sell everything. The cold night wind slashed Charles's wife's life like a dagger. Elisabeth, despite the fact that she had no involvement in the affair, but she was certain that Charles had something to do with it. Louisa had just entered Elisabeth's room. She happened to see Elisabeth's picture book. She eventually learned Elisabeth was her mother. She had no idea why Elisabeth would give her away. However, Elisabeth stated that she sold Louisa for £500. Louisa is pleased that Elisabeth is well compensated. They flung off their chains and forgave each other for their crimes by the end of the story. In a carriage, the family departed the manor to start a new life. This is the conclusion of the film Firelight. Life is inevitably unpredictable. When people experience the unexpected, it takes a long time for them to adjust, change, and sort out their feelings and desires. This procedure is excruciating, but we must be honest with ourselves and keep hold of the person and the chance that can assist you in saving yourself. This is the only way out of your predicament. Everything can be healed with time. However, letting go is a vital prerequisite in order for what must end to end. We allow the damage to continue and the agony to grow if we insist on clinging on to the past. Charles and Louisa both made the mistake of fleeing. Fortunately, they met Elisabeth, a strong-willed lover and mother. As a result, their sad past was rapidly severed by the sharp edge of love. State had been his and his wife's wedding house. During his wife's paralysis, though, the estate became more of a jail for everyone. Charles adored his wife, but he never considered whether she wanted to live this way. He'd been lying to himself for 10 years. Maybe he also harmed his wife for 10 years. Then he slammed all the doors and windows wide, exposing his wife's body beneath the covers.